Welcome. Welcome, everyone. My name is Renee from Schaumburg Library, and it's a pleasure to introduce our speaker this evening, our presenter. Before we get started, we have a few little housekeeping things. Wanted everyone to know where the restrooms are. So as you exit this room, just go to the left. Feel free to get up at any time. The men's restrooms are to the left, and then you go to the right a little, and they're located in a similar area. Another thing before we get started, I just wanted to mention a few upcoming programs. On Tuesday, May 23rd, we have Jim Gibbons doing The Life of Alex Trebek. Then we have on Wednesday, April 12th, we have historic Chicago bakeries. Anybody remember Bernie Brothers? Okay. And then last, it's going to happen in the summer, but one of our most popular programs, Cutting the Cable Cord, that will be on Sunday, July 30th. So let's get started. Leslie Goddard, she's back. By popular demand, yes, popular demand. For one of her newer programs, Leslie portrays famous women and offers many history lectures. She's a former museum director, and among her accomplishments, she's the author of 2 books on Chicago history. And tonight you're going to be entertained and inspired. So everybody fasten your seatbelts for Pan Am Betty.
I can remember exactly how it all began for me. One morning, this was in December of 1960, my roommate Nancy came running in my bedroom, waving an advertisement, this advertisement in her hand. Betty, she said, you have got to see this. I propped myself up on my bed and I took a look. Students wanted, must want the world. Must be single, healthy, age 21 at least, between 5'3" and 5'9", at least a high school grad with a knowledge of a foreign language. Please tell me you'll try for it, Nancy. You'd be perfect. I admit, my heart was pounding. I had always loved flying. The year before, I had convinced my friends to take a beach vacation just so we could fly on an airplane. I was working at the time for an international company. I was a secretary because I could meet people from other countries. And I had spent 2 summers working as a stewardess for a tiny little puddle jumper airline. But Pan Am, that was the world's most glamorous airline. Everyone who was anyone flew Pan Am in 1960. President Eisenhower, Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra, and Ava Gardner. Think who you could meet. And Pan Am stewardesses, they were right up there with movie stars and supermodels. And Pan Am had just introduced the Boeing 707, the first jetliner. It was the start of the jet age. Everyone wanted to be part of the jet set, flying off to fast airplanes. I closed my eyes and I could walking down the aisle of a 707, wearing that iconic Pan Am blue uniform, serving up martinis to movie stars, hanging up coats for billionaires. My chances of getting it were slim, but still, couldn't hurt to try. All right, I said, I'll call. On the day of my interview, I woke up at 5 a.m., like a little kid on Christmas. I dressed in my very best dress. It was a dark blue polyester double knit with big patch pockets. I teased my hair and did my makeup. took the 2-hour bus ride into Manhattan and made my way to the hotel where they were having interviews. I opened up the door of the conference room and, oh my goodness, it was packed. There were women everywhere, at least 1,000 women in this tiny little room. I wasn't that surprised. Anyone who wanted to be a stewardess wanted Pan Am. Pan Am only flew international. Anytime you opened the door of an airplane at the end of a flight, you would step out into a new country. Didn't take a genius to see my chances were slim, but all right, just have fun, doesn't matter. So I got in a line to fill out an application, turned it in, then I went and waited, got into another line to be weighed. The girl ahead of me got onto the scale, and the supervisor said, "Sorry, you're way over." This poor girl burst into tears. I felt awful for her. Got on, and I made the cut. Whew. So it was back to more waiting, then an interview with a middle-aged man. "So tell me about yourself," he said. So I told him about working as a secretary, about beach vacation, about the little airliner that I worked for. What's it called? Tribute Airlines. Never heard of it. Can't be very important. Well, no, it's small, but it's a lovely little airline, and everyone who works for it works very hard. To my amazement, I was not the door. Back for more waiting. And this room was not filled with 1,000 young women now. There were not even 100 women left. There were maybe 40 people in the room. This is when the butterflies started. Things were really getting serious. The last interview was for 5 people seated at a table. Before you sit, one woman said, "Could you walk to that side of the room and back?" You don't know strange until you have walked back and forth with 5 people watching you. I knew they were assessing me, my figure, my posture. I thought about my mother, chin up, shoulders back. Then the grilling started. "Do you speak any foreign languages?" "Yes, well, I studied French in high school. I'm a little rusty." They gave me a paragraph to translate, which I did, thank goodness. And then, "Are you single?" In those days, most airlines required you to quit if you got married. And even if you didn't, you had to leave when you turned maybe 32 years old. Can you imagine taking a vow not to marry and to quit when you turn 32? I didn't think anything about it. I just signed away. And for the next week, panic was all. Every day I would run home from work, check the mailbox, and 1 week later, the letter arrived. "Nancy, it's here, the letter is here." This crisp white letter with that distinctive blue Pan Am logo. "We are pleased to inform you that you are one of 17 women who have been chosen to be Pan Am's next stewardess class." I don't believe it. I got it. I could not believe it. Girls like me didn't get jobs like this, did they? One of only 17? I had to keep reading it to make sure it was true, but there it was, in black and white. 8 weeks later, I arrived in Miami to start basic training. The training course took place in a motel just off the runway at Miami International Airport. Pan Am might be the height of luxury, but our accommodations were not. Oh, only 5 weeks. I met the other stewardesses. They were only about half American. The others mostly from Europe, girls from Sweden and Norway, England, Germany. Each one of them seemed more sophisticated than the last. 3 Japanese girls there from Honolulu. What was I doing with these girls? First day of class, we sat down at 7:30 in our little school desk, clutching our pencils. Tall man with a big mustache came in, handed out our itineraries for the next 5 weeks. Remember, every morning you will be tested on what you learned the day before, and you are always being observed. Any infraction of the rules, wearing a uniform incorrectly, coming in after curfew, having a drink at the motel bar, will be grounds for immediate dismissal. And so it began. So much to learn. We had to learn all Pan Am flight routes. We had to learn exactly where Pan Am flew, geography. Pan Am flew to 80 cities. We could show a bag. Shanghai, or Vienna, or Singapore, Tahiti. We had to know them all. We had to know each airplane model, its fuel range, its capacity, where the fire extinguishers were. Just for fun, it was completely different on each model. We had to know how to stir up a perfect cocktail. We had to know how to put out a galley fire, how to deliver a baby, how to inflate a life raft, how to evacuate a 707 in 90 seconds. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. And every 3 or 4 days, a young woman would disappear. Pan Am's policy was to dismiss a trainee with no one knowing. It would just be, Linda, could you step out in the hallway? And poof. When you got back to the motel, her belongings were gone, and she was too. It was exceedingly nerve-wracking. They drilled us in etiquette. Chin up, shoulders back, the etiquette instructor said. Imagine a wire running from the top of your head, holding your chin up. We practiced walking with books balanced on top of our heads. We had to know proper addresses. Betty, could you demonstrate the proper address for a United States ambassador? Welcome aboard, Your Excellency. How about a United States senator? Welcome aboard, Senator Jones. And Rabbi? Welcome aboard, Rabbi Rabinowitz. They trained us to sit with our legs crossed at the ankles, never at the knees, and never jiggle or strut when you're walking. There was to be no wiggling at Pan Am. Grooming was wrong. Correctable, but wrong. Hours of grooming. We all had to wear the same lipstick, a shade called Ellen. To be honest with you, some girls looked like corpses in it. But you needed special written permission to wear anything else. 5 weeks in, it was time for our haircuts. I was so excited. They seated me in a leather seat, washed my hair and cut it short, put it in rollers. Do you know? Sat there for 30 minutes, then back to have the rollers removed and the hair teased and brushed out. We all gathered together to admire our new haircuts, and they had given us all variations on the exact same haircut. We looked like clones. To this day, when I see photographs of our graduating class, I can't tell which one is me because we all looked identical. Oh well, I didn't care. I felt so chic and glamorous. We would do anything that Pan Am wanted. But my favorite part of training was the galley training. Pan Am's food was top-notch. It came from Maxime's, the Paris restaurant. We had to know all the details of every meal, including the full first-class dinner service. It always started with drinks and hors d'oeuvres. We would fill big silver tureens with ice and top it with prawns and tubs of beluga caviar. And the caviar was always served with a shot of neat chilled vodka. And they always told us, Be generous with the servings. Let the Then came the salad. Secretly, we all loved lobster salad. We always hoped it was time for us to eat. And then the main course. In first class, passengers always had a choice. Perhaps lobster thermidor, or roast chicken, filet of sole, tenderloin of beef. The beef came on raw. It's very tricky, a real skill. You have to keep turning it to make sure it doesn't burn. And if a passenger ordered the roast, we would wheel it on a cart right down to their seat and then carve it right in front of them. Then came cheeses, a selection of the best local cheeses, and then coffee and dessert. Perhaps a coconut cream pie on a flight to Hawaii, or Parisian pastries on a flight to France, or our favorite cherries jubilee. It's amazing we didn't all gain 20 pounds. And some of these girls, they had never cooked before, but here we were, whipping up haute cuisine for 300 people. We all made mistakes. My friend Brenda, she once was practicing the two silver spoons in one hand like chopsticks to serve something like cheese. She sent prawns flying across. Roberta once burned a tenderloin until it looked like leather. It took a lot of practice to make food up to Pan Am and colorful muumuus who had trays with glasses of chilled pineapple juice on them. We got into the car with our luggage. Wherever in the world, there was always a limousine waiting to take the crew to our hotel. And in the limousine, they would hand us envelopes with our per diems. Always at least $20 in local currency. It's always more than we needed. We never saw a hotel bill. Our dry cleaning was always paid for. And best of all, flights were infrequent in those days. On this particular trip, I had 3 days in Honolulu. I think I spent the entire time sitting on Waikiki Beach with a flower tucked behind my ear and wearing a grass skirt, just like a little tourist schoolgirl. All I wanted to do was just listen to the waves. Believe I was there. I was the luckiest person in the world. And before long, I could have told you the best place to go in Sydney if you need a haircut, where to go in Tokyo for a really good manicure. Sometimes I would be in Hawaii 2 or 3 times a month. I could drop off my dry cleaning on one trip and pick it up the next time I was in town. Back in the 1960s, very few of your friends and neighbors flew. Only maybe 8% of Americans had ever been on an airplane at all. And here I was eating exotic foods like poi in Hawaii or seaweed in Hong Kong. It was a million miles from what any girls I'd gone to high school with had ever dreamed about. One time, I bid on a flight to India just so that I could go see the Taj Mahal. As soon as I was in the crew hotel, I called down to the lobby. Any chance I could get a car to take me to Agra tomorrow? The voice on the other end of the telephone said, "Please calm down." I'm calm. I'd just like to go to Agra tomorrow. Please calm down. We went back and forth like this for about 5 minutes until I finally figured out he wanted me to come down to the lobby, which I did. And he arranged a car for me. The driver that day filled me up with information. He took me driving past snake charmers and pointed out sacred cows to the magnificent Taj Mahal. It was an unforgettable day. And of course, this job was a shopper's dream. I once was working on one of the around-the-world flights. Every day, Pan Am had 2 round-the-world flights take off, one going east, one going west. In this particular trip, I was flying with a friend named Brenda, and we had a 3-day layover in Hong Kong. "How'd you like some pearls?" she said. "Real ones?" She took me on a little boat out to an island, and I bought my first string of real pearls. That necklace has lasted a long time. My friendship with Brenda lasted even longer. In some Asian countries, you could buy an entire outfit for just a few American dollars. On long-haul flights after the meal service, I would sit on the jump seat and flip through fashion magazines, ripping out photographs of beautiful dresses. When I had a layover in Bangkok, I'd buy some silk. And when we went to Hong Kong the next time, a man named Mr. Wong would meet us at the airport. We would hand him a magazine photograph and a bundle of silk. He'd take our measurements. And the next time we were in Hong Kong, he would meet us with these beautiful creations. I got some lovely silk shift dresses in yellow and turquoise with matching collarless capes, just like Audrey Hepburn. Speaking of movie stars, we got comfortable meeting celebrities. We never advertised it, but I once had David Niven on a flight. He was so charming and impeccably dressed. He joined me at the back of the first-class cabin, and he said, "Would you like to play a game?" So for about 5 minutes, we matched up each first-class passenger with their ideal pet. There was one woman with very curly hair. We decided she would be the perfect owner of a poodle. And there was another man who sat there scowling. We decided he surely owned a boxer. I laughed so hard. I was sure I was going to get in trouble. Other celebrities were, how do I say it, challenging. Do you know, Elizabeth Taylor and Frank Sinatra both had a reputation for being difficult? Joan Crawford, she would fly with her own cooler that we knew would be stocked with Pepsi and vodka. And Warren Beatty, he would flirt with any stewardess he laid eyes on. We couldn't get away from him. Well, any passenger could be difficult. We knew to keep an eye out for married men. Some men would take off their wedding ring before climbing on board, so we would look for that telltale white line where their wedding band had been. One time, my friend Zoe, she had a passenger, very important, pompous passenger in first class who'd had a bit too much to drink. He puffed himself up and he said to her, "Do you know who I am?" She immediately popped into the galley and she said, "Ladies, we have a passenger in 2A who does not know who he is. Can any of you maybe identify him?" Passengers I could handle. What I feared? Turbulence. I had always been prone to air sickness. Monsoon season was the scariest, especially if you were flying out of the Far East. It would be lurching all across the sky, always at night, and sometimes all the way across the Pacific. I have a friend named Tina who told me she was once working on a flight out of Tokyo. It was breakfast time, so she was making scrambled eggs. She had just put on her clean, freshly pressed smock. She put the eggs into a big foil pan and she was happily scrambling away when the plane hit a pocket of air. Boom! She fell to the ground and the eggs fell too. Up out of that pan in a sheet of yellow liquid and then down all over her. She had to clean everything up, not just the galley, but herself as well. When the turbulence was bad, we would go through the cabin reassuring the passengers. But if it was really bad, we would have to be strapped in too in the jump seats. There would be objects flying out of the overhead compartments. Sometimes a plane would lurch so much your stomach would drop. And you could be sure that exactly at that moment, some inane passenger would ring the bell to ask for a double whiskey. But really, most passengers were well behaved. And that was the best part, meeting people. I love talking to people. After meal service, I would say, "So tell me what it's like living in Berlin." Or, "Any chance I could talk you into a game of hearts, Mrs. Jones?" Sometimes they had questions for me, too. Once, I was sitting on the spiral staircase of a 707 reading the latest copy of Scientific American. Most of the passengers were asleep. It was dark. We were way up in the sky. But the passenger next to me was awake, and he leaned over and he said to me, "Wouldn't Vogue be a better choice?" Oh, I rarely read anything but this. I studied biology in college, and I liked it in description. About rude, but seems surprising. You must be for a stewardess. No, not at all. You see that woman over there? She speaks Russian and Finnish. And the stewardess who just went into the galley, she's from Japan and has a master's in communication. I could have told him that at this point, about 10% of Pan Am stewardesses had master's degrees. And this was a time when the majority of American women did not even attend college. The next morning, as we were deplaning, he stopped and he said to me, "You know, my daughter told me recently she'd like to be a stewardess." I told her no way, but I think I was wrong. You're not all empty-headed. I was wrong. He was. I don't mean we were all serious. We like to have a good time. It was pretty common for a male passenger to say, "Would you like to go to dinner tonight?" It was always fun to take you to dinner. But that's all it was, dinner, no funny business. Maybe a kiss or two, but no more than that. In the circles I hung out in, nice girls didn't go further than that, at least not in the early 1960s. By the late 1960s, things were changing. Anyone remember this book? Coffee, Tea, or Me? It's two airline hostesses with the mostesses of fun in mind. Very risque. So of course it was a bestseller when it appeared in 1967. Later, the man who wrote it admitted he'd made up most of it. It was fiction. We could have told him that. It's not at all what me and my fellow stewardesses experienced. But airlines discovered that passengers loved the idea of the bubble-headed, sexy stewardess who had nothing but men on her mind. National Airlines in the 70s had a campaign that went, "I'm Cheryl, fly me." Continental had an ad campaign that said, "At Continental, we really move our tails for you." I remember the first time I saw Southwest stewardesses wearing hot pants and go-go boots. I understand the marketing, and I wasn't a prude, but it wasn't for us. It wasn't for Pan Am. We wanted to be taken seriously. We needed to be taken seriously. We wanted to look good, we were programmed to look good, but we were not flying Playboy bunnies. We were there for safety. And safety was important, especially with all the turmoil in the world in the 60s, especially in Vietnam. Even as the war in Vietnam kept ramping up, Pan Am kept flying flights in and out, flying the soldiers off on R&R trips, bringing soldiers home, bringing soldiers over for the war. In 1965, an Air France stewardess shot her as she opened up the air landing on Son Yat Airport in Saigon. It sent shockwaves through the industry. Pan Am ramped up its safety measures. Pilots were instructed to fly at altitude as long as possible before dropping very sharply and very suddenly in for landing. It was stomach-lurching. We had to make sure everyone was strapped in tightly. Once, after we landed in Saigon, the flight engineer asked me to come outside. He had finished his walk around to the plane. He pointed to one of the engines. "What is it?" I said. "Bullet holes. 4 of them on the underside of one of the 4 engines. Probably a rifle. Never could have taken down a plane." I was shocked. They got that plane covered up the holes, get that plane patched, and get it out of there as quickly and safely as possible. But the worst part for us was seeing the boys at the airport, saying goodbye to their families. They were teary-eyed like the little kids they were. Do you know the average age of an American soldier in Vietnam? 19 years old. We did anything we could to make those flights nice for them. We'd joke around with them. They'd say to us, "I'll have a couple of beers," knowing we couldn't serve them alcohol. We'd say, "I'll get you a lemonade on the rocks." We'd bring them Archie cartoons. They'd ask for second helpings of ice cream. But the closer that we got to Saigon, the quieter they got. One by one, they all stopped talking. By the time we landed, the plane was quiet. We stood at the doorway to say goodbye. Good luck, we'll see you on the way back, knowing we'd never see many of them again. Each soldier served for 10 months, and the flights home had a completely different atmosphere. In fact, as the newcomers were deplaning, we could see the lines of returning soldiers ready to board to go home. Their army fatigues, dusty and dirty, red clay caked on their boots, glazed look in their eyes. I cannot imagine what traumas these boys had heard, but they never wanted to talk about them. They were just ecstatic to be going home, very chirpy and excited. Sometimes we couldn't get them to calm down. Often, we were told we had to get on the PA system and say, "We'll be walking through the main cabin now, collecting any illicit substances you might have." We'd fill laundry bags up with little baggies and vials. There was one flight that was so rowdy that a fellow stewardess got on the PA system and she said, "Everyone, we need you to calm down. If you will all calm down, the coffee service will be done topless." Everything on that plane got very quiet very quickly. So we smiled as we served them all their dinner. We winked as they waited expectantly. After dinner, we went into the galley and made the coffee. We rattled the coffee cart. They were craning to look. And then from out in the main cabin, we heard some hoots and then loud boo. This flight had an extra flight engineer on it. We had convinced him and the second pilot to do the coffee service. So they were there, shirts off, aprons strapped on their bare torsos, serving up the coffee. He needed that humor because those boys coming home got very little applause. We saw the protesters at the airports holding up posters denouncing them, spitting on them, name-calling. A lot of those soldiers didn't even want to be seen in their uniforms. They'd change before landing and then throw away their uniforms in the garbage cans. We thought we were doing our country a service. We were doing our bit to help the war. Nearly every Pan Am stewardess who was stationed in San Francisco or Los Angeles worked on those flights in and out of Vietnam. We were one of the largest contingents of civilians working during the war. The boys on my planes, they never would have been the ones burning villages or shooting babies. The boys on my planes, all the boys that I saw, were honorable and respectable. Right? War is hell. The only thing I can say for sure is we got to know the world better. That's the thing about working as a stewardess. You get to know humanity better. You really get to know people better. But over the years, one by one, fellow stewardesses left, usually to get married. First Brenda, then Roberta. Angela married a pilot. She couldn't get away from the aviation life. You want to know the average career length for a stewardess in the mid-1960s? 2.5 years. And airlines liked it like that way, that they could always find someone who was younger and unattached. Little pension accrued, minimal insurance payments. But a lot of us, we didn't want to stop working just because we got married or because we turned 32. Heck yes, yes, we joined unions, and yes, we fought back against the restrictions, the marriage bans. It wasn't that we wanted to cause trouble. It was that we just didn't want to stop working because we turned a certain age or happened to get married. We were caught right in the middle. To sexists, we were loose, easy women. To feminists, we were sellouts because we stuck to the rules made by men. But here is what no one ever tells you. All law eventually became feminists, at least in part. We wanted to see the world. We were hungry for adventure. Yes, we wore high heels, and we smiled, and we wore lipstick while we were working, but we were willing to do those things because it meant so much freedom. We flew all over the world. We cashed our own paychecks. In our time off, we drank in bars. We toured foreign cities all by ourselves. Stewardesses has this image of being bubbleheads who thought of nothing but boys. But most stewardesses who I knew got into the profession because they were too adventurous and curious about the world to be stuck in a 9-to-5 job. And as the years went by, we started fighting back more. We were getting madder and madder. Some women got married and then hid it. They would slip their wedding band on and off in between flights. 8 stewardesses held a press conference once. They lined up and asked the journalists, could they tell which one of them was 33 and which ones were 30? And are the women over 32 really old bags? Indeed. The turning point came with the Civil Rights Act. Title 7 of the Civil Rights Act banned discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, religion, and gender. They threw in gender as a kind of joke at the end, but 2 stewardesses were among the first through the door when the equal was created. They were demanding an end to the marriage bans and then to the age restrictions. It was a moment in time. I remember the first time I saw a stewardess serving drinks wearing a wedding band. A breakthrough! But it was the end of the line for me. By 1970, I had been a bridesmaid 17 times. I wasn't looking for a husband, but one day the right guy showed up. No more great adventures in places like Hawaii and Hong Kong. Time to say goodbye to that life. I was the last of our group to get married. But a year before I left, the 747 came into service. We called them jumbo jets. 2.5 times more passengers than a 707. A lot more work and a lot less glamour. Whole new era in flying. A couple of weeks ago, I was out in my yard after planting some roses. It was right at the time when the Pan Am flights took off for Europe. I looked up, sure enough, there was a plane taking off just as dark clouds were moving in. I said to my husband, am I ever glad not to be up there tonight? I was standing there with dirt under my fingernails. I hadn't had my hair done in weeks, but I wouldn't have traded my husband and my sons for all those glamorous hotels and gourmet meals. I love being a wife and a mother, but old habits die hard. I became a stewardess because I was in love with flying, and I've never lost that sense of wonder. I'm still fascinated by the sights of twinkling lights from cities below and all those stars up above. Sometimes I'll look up and I'll see a plane and I'll think, I wonder where they're going. Because it could be anywhere in the world, right? Even a jet trail makes me nostalgic. Being on an airplane in the 1960s, it was like being a guest at a very exclusive party. It was a real honor to be there. So to all of you, anyone who flew Pan Am in the 1960s, all I have to say is, thank you so much for flying your Pan Am Clipper. Thank you, and good luck. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, we went online. All right, thank you so much. If any of you need to get going, feel free, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. If you're here in person, you can raise your hand. Those of you joining us virtually, you can type your question into chat and it'll get conveyed to me. So, what can I tell you? Yes. Yes. I think this is a question that she's actually asking of Leslie. So I will, do you mind if I take off my hair? You'll know, I'm gonna take off my hat and my gloves and I'll take off my short hair. So you'll know I'm not a Pan Am stewardess anymore. I'll go back to being Leslie Goddard. I am very sorry to tell you I am not. I never was a stewardess. But is there anyone in this room who ever worked as a stewardess for any airline? Anyone here right now? There you go. So if I made any mistakes, let me know, or let everybody here know. There you go. No, I'm a historian, really. And I got interested in this topic, I'll tell you, because books recently. Since we're a library, right? We should talk about books. This program was based on a number of memoirs, but one of the major books that was the source for this is called Come Fly the World by Julia Cook. This was published in 2021. It's the jet age story of the women of Pan Am. And this inspired me to do, this is the first composite character I've done. I do portrayals of individual women like Eleanor Roosevelt, and I do Amelia Earhart and Jackie Kennedy and Julia Child. But this is the first time I've done not one character, but it's sort of like, I feel like it's kind of like Rosie the Riveter. Like the story of the stewardesses is a composite as much as stories are all real stories, but I sort of put them together. So, yeah.
In your research, did you ever interview any of the stewardesses?
Did I ever interview stewardesses? I did, yes. And yes, from the 60s and the 70s. I met a couple from the 80s, but very much so. And it's interesting because every stewardess experience is different. But it's remarkable the things that so many stewardesses remember so vividly. And very often the things that will stand out are the glamour of it, that it really was. There was one quote from a woman, and she said, I want to tell you that it wasn't glamorous, but really, it was fantastic, you know. And a lot of them will talk about the other options. And you know, anyone who was growing up in the 50s or 60s, you can remember that for young women who wanted or needed to work, if you were middle class, the options were limited. You know, you could be a teacher, you could be a nurse, you could be a secretary, or you could be a stewardess. Now, if you were adventurous, which one of those jobs would you pursue? You know, it was so glamorous. So, yeah.
Can you refresh my memory about the lawsuits that resulted in many flight attendants going back to work at an older age because they were fired because they were...
Yes, there were. The EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, was created, you know, as a result of the Civil Rights Act. And starting around 1968, you start to see lawsuits. and a lot of them targeting, I mean, a lot of them coming from the stewardesses, but targeting the marriage bans, the age restrictions, and the gender restrictions. There was a very important lawsuit in 1971 by a man who'd been denied employment as steward at Pan Am, and of course on the basis of race. I mean, it was a flurry in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So much so that in the mid-70s, that is when a number of stewardesses who had been fired were rehired. Some of them because of lawsuits and some of them simply because the airlines had to bring them back. Average length, career length for a stewardess by 1976 was, I believe, 6 years, which is a dramatic difference from the 2.5 years in the mid-60s. And now, but did anyone see there was an article just last year about a woman set a Guinness record for longest career as a stewardess? Her name is Betty, which is one reason I called this character Betty. She has been flying as of last year for 65 years. She started in 1957, so that's quite a record, yeah. You have to be able to still lift luggage and, you know, evacuate a plane, but she could still do it in her 80s. Yeah.
I wanted to know, when did they stop making that you had to be a nurse in order to become?
When did they stop making it that you had to be a nurse? Really? It was earlier than I thought. If you don't know the basics, a woman named Ellen Church, in 1930, she convinced Boeing Air Transport to hire her as a nurse, and that led to a lot of airlines hiring women as nurses on these planes. It actually started to change in World War II. Because it kind of makes sense, right? Nurses were needed elsewhere. But after the war, it really kind of opened up, and a lot of the airlines discovered it's not really good to advertise that your stewardesses are nurses, because it implies, you know, you're gonna need a nurse on the plane if you fly. But the reality is airplane technology was improving, and the reason that nurses were useful on planes is because in the days of no unpressurized cabins and propeller-driven planes. Propeller planes have to fly at a lower altitude. They can't get up as high as a jet can. And there's a lot more turbulence. So there really was a lot more air sick. Remember when airlines, I think they still do, they have the little, you know, baggies for air sickness on there. And the planes reeked of oil, and they were often really hot or freezing cold. Got better. When you get to the jet planes, I mean, they are so smooth. And that's when they start realizing, you know, we can get a lot more of these, you know, wealthy businessmen flying on an expense account on our airliner if we have young, pretty stewardesses to look at. So that changed. Yeah.
Any idea when Pan Am started flying to Europe, what the cost of a ticket?
I had the same question. Wait. I had to write it down because it's really remarkable compared to today. In the days of regulation, pre-1978, the United States government set routes and airfares, and they still, to some extent, control routes. But they set the airfare, so airlines could not compete on price at all. They had to compete on other things, and service, and, you know, young, sexy stewardesses. Let's see. To give you a sense, a ticket on TWA, 1955. One-way Chicago to Phoenix was $138. I'm sorry, not one-way, round trip, $138. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $1,200, Chicago to Phoenix. Now, jets led to lower fares. In 1965, the cheapest coach class flight from New York to London cost the equivalent of about $1,800, and that's in 1965. The average round trip New York to London in 1960 was $3,500. I mean, that's a lot of money in 1960 dollars, a lot of money. It was very much something that was for the wealthy. I mean, maybe as a once-in-a-lifetime thing, you could fly to Europe, but it's not something that average people did. That changed over time. And by the 70s, especially with the 747, because the 747 was so big, the airfares start coming down, and then deregulation really brought them down. So everyone, we talk about, oh, wouldn't it be great to go back to caviar and champagne on planes? But the reality is you'd have to pay for it, and most people wouldn't want to give up, low fares in exchange for that. It's a tough one. Yeah, coming in from online.
So from online, we had a patient ask, I once heard that a lot of the Pan Am flight attendants were spies on the side.
Yes, there has always been this rumor that Pan Am cabin crew, or sometimes pilots, deck crew, were spies. There has never been any confirmation of that, and Pan Am always rigorously denied it. But we do know that there were people in the aviation industry working as spies. So it's possible, but we've never had confirmation of it. So who knows? Other things? Yeah.
Is there still a weight restriction?
Is there still a weight restriction? Believe it or not, there is. But it is not for cosmetics reasons today. Today they will say you need to be able to fit through the emergency access doors. You need to be able to reach into the overhead compartments. So if you're 4'9", not so likely. You need to be in weight in proportion to height, they will say. So not nearly as strict as it used to be, no. And it's interesting when you think about it. Airlines took their cue from railroads and ships where there had been stewards for a long time. And in a lot of cases, those were not only men, but African-American men, and a lot of their income was through tips, especially on the railroads, the Pullman porters. The airlines, when they started hiring women in the 30s, they very specifically no tips. And that was a way to signal that this was an occupation of a little bit higher social status, and having mostly white women, not all, but mostly white women. Pan Am hired American women between like 1945 and 1957, and didn't really in big numbers until the 70s. Now, Pan Am did have international stewardesses. They hired Hispanic women, because that gives, your flights to Latin America a little flair. And they did hire Japanese women for flights to the Far East, make it a little exotic that way, but not African American in big numbers. Yeah?
Is your hat authentic?
Oh, thank you. The question is the hat authentic? It is authentic. However, I will tell you, it doesn't really fit me that well. The uniform and the hat are from the 1969 to 1971 Pan Am stewardess look. This was a really good day on Etsy when I found this, because it fits me, which is remarkable. They introduced this look, it was by Evan Picone, for the coming of the 747. 747s entered service in January 1970, and the bowler hat was designed to be worn at a kind of jaunty angle, kind of perched on your head. I think the color is space-age blue. These uniforms, and the reason I say it was a good day on Etsy is because not only does it fit me, but I could afford it. Pan Am items are highly collectible. And the other thing I've got is a Pan Am pin, and I don't want to tell my husband what I spent on this. The stewardess wings were solid gold, and they are really treasured today. So if anyone has one, don't throw it out. But isn't that kind of a nice testimony to what this airline meant? And by the way, if anyone's curious, Pan Am went out of business in December 1991. The last flight was December 4th. There were multiple reasons. The coming of the 747 was a big one. It was the right decision at the time, but who could have predicted the economic crisis of the 70s, and especially the fuel crisis? Pan Am flew long-haul flights, and it required a lot more fuel than others, and therefore had a lot higher fuel expenses and got hit really hard. 7s going off with only a minority of seats occupied was devastating. There was also deregulation, which hit Pan Am really hard. Other airlines started flying international. For a long time, it was just Pan Am and TWA. Then you had the disaster at Tenerife, where 2 planes collided on the runway, and then the terrorist explosion over Lockerbie in 1988. People just saw Pan Am as a target. And Pan Am was a symbol of the US. I mean, that was the international carrier of the United States. And people got scared to fly it. So they were bleeding millions in the late 80s. And Delta helped out. They sold off a lot of their routes in the hotels, but couldn't stop the flow. So 1991, they went bankrupt and disappeared. However, there is a Pan Am museum in Long Island at the Cradle of Aviation Museum. So if you ever go to, I think it's Garden City, it's worth stopping in. So, all right, anything else from online?
We had a question about being a stewardess on the discontinued Sonic plane to Europe. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, no, I don't so much. Now, I know that Pan Am did enter the race to create a supersonic flight, and they actually did commission some, but they never ultimately went into service through Pan Am. The Concorde absolutely did, not through Pan Am. So. But is there a story of the stewardesses who were wanting to do that? That I don't know. It would be a good question. All right. Last question here. Yeah.
Did the stewardesses have to stay in a particular hotel?
Did the stewardesses have to stay in a particular hotel? They did. I mean, they stayed in the crew hotels because the airline paid for it, and Pan Am owned the Intercontinental hotels, and they were gorgeous. I mean, beautiful. Now, not always. There were some cities that didn't have them, but many, many of the places that Pan Am flew to had these hotels. And if you stayed there, you know, it was all covered. Now, there was, and this is another discrimination, was that typically pilots were assigned. Stewardesses always had to share hotel rooms. And it was one of the things that was really bothersome because stewardesses are dealing with the same kinds of jet lag and you know, problems if your roommate comes in late or if she's a smoker. You know, you need to sleep sometimes. And there was a lot of activity by the unions, a lot of women who got involved in unions to fight back against that. So Pan Am sold off the Intercontinental hotels when the financial crises. So, all right. Well, thank you all so much. Thank you those who joined us. Thank you. Take care.